Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's discussion with Daniel from Dr. Chrono. I wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Veronica. I've been with Jamf just 5 years this Monday, and I'm the Business Development Manager for our SMB segment. So I'm here helping small to medium businesses be successful or find success with their Apple devices. And I'll pass it to Daniel to give us a little bit of background on him.
Yeah, so I'm Daniel Kivatinos, Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Dr. Chrono. I've been at the company since day one. I don't know if you want us to go into the company at all. Yes?
Please do.
Sure. So we are on the Apple platform. We are I'd call it a mobile first experience for providers where we build for iPhone, iPad, Mac, a EHR, electronic health record, practice management. We have billing, patient portal, and kind of we take advantage of like the Apple ecosystem and all of the hardware that they have to create the best medical record experience for medical professionals.
And for those of you that are new to Jamf, Jamf is an Apple device management tool or solution. So we help organizations better manage their Apple technology and really get the most out of it. But to get the conversation started, Daniel, I'd love to hear a little bit about how Dr. Chrono kind of shifted when the pandemic first hit. I know a lot of folks talked about remote work and really some of the struggles with remote learning. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how Dr. Chrono navigated that.
Sure. So the pitch that I just what I've just told you guys about the company, we've been doing that for the last 10 years in the history of the company, doing medical records and the practice management and the billing side. I think when the pandemic hit, things kind of changed for everybody in a very, very drastic way. And everybody on this, webinar kind of feels it with quarantine that's been happening and everything that's been happening and just healthcare in general. But our company has really, we were initially a cloud-based vendor. A lot of companies out there in our space are not. So we were fortunate enough to look at what we were doing and revisit the provider and patient experience. So what that means to me is, in general, pre-COVID, just about every appointment was physical. You had to drive to your provider. The provider would take care of you in person, and everything was kind of this physical appointment. But because of COVID, doctors were getting COVID, patients were getting COVID, people were unsure if they had COVID. The world kind of changed over time, meaning the government, Medicare and Medicaid said we're going to start paying out for virtual visits. And what's a virtual visit? A virtual visit is a visit through a webcam or an iPhone or an iPad, and the doctor can get paid for that encounter. So Dr. Chrono said, okay, the world is changing. Medicare, Medicaid, all of the private insurers are starting to pay for this. We are cloud-based. We have medical records in the cloud. We can layer in telehealth as part of this experience. Now we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of appointments happening. We're approximately doing around 400,000 appointments per week in patients. Now let's assume that probably 99.9% of those pre-COVID were physical, you have to go to the brick and mortar location. I do think that the trend now, and what is happening is a lot of patients are kind of looking for that kind of futuristic experience where they can just visit a provider virtually. And I can tell you personally, I've already had 2 of my personal doctors do virtual visits with me, and prior to COVID, they wouldn't do that. So I think the shift is also happening in force because the providers are kind of saying, okay, what other alternatives are there if I can protect myself and protect my patient? Because they don't know if they may have COVID, the patient may not know if they have. There's kind of this unknown there. And I think providers are really questioning the way that they've done things, and it's great. It's actually really great. to see this happening in the industry. It's kind of a long time coming. People were doing FaceTime calls, they were doing Skype, they were doing, Facebook video chats, and I think healthcare kind of just said, no, we're not going to do that. But the COVID pandemic really had the government say, okay, we're going to start to pay out for a video visit it at a faster rate and an approval rate. Prior to COVID, it wasn't that easy to get paid for a video visit. So that's another barrier that kind of just was like brought down. Providers need to get paid to do video visits, so now they are getting paid. And generally, the insurance companies look to Medicare and Medicaid to see what they should be doing. So if Medicare and Medicaid are starting to pay for video visits, the other insurers in the United States say, okay, let's start to pay out for this. So it's kind of an exciting time for healthcare. I mean, it's horrible at what's happening with everything, and to all of us and with quarantine. But in healthcare, there's almost like I'd call it like a renaissance, where providers are kind of revisiting what they're doing, saying, what I did in the past may not work always for what's happening in the future. So Dr. Chrono, we said, let's launch a telehealth product, layer that on top, and medical professionals should be able to see patients at will and have an amazing experience. And I think there's this education process that's happening. I see it in our user base and new customers coming in, where they don't even quite know how telehealth could work, right? There's a lot that can be done there. So there's a lot of unknowns, and our sales team and our support team and our marketing team and the whole company is kind of doing a mass education on, here's all these options available. This is how you get paid. This is how you might be able to do it. These are some of the guidelines and like how you can possibly do this. So it's an interesting time. I guess
Yeah. Sorry.
I guess a question for Jamf, like, how is Jamf helping these organizations during this time? Like, what would you say Jamf is doing? The world has kind of changed, and I think Jamf has been cloud-based. Dr. Chrono actually uses Jamf. So for us, it was actually great. We deploy Jamf to all of our employees. It's a cloud-based thing. So I guess like talk through like what is that doing for you guys?
Yeah, certainly. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that a lot of folks are kind of being forced to revisit how they do business. And a lot of folks were, just taken aback by this need to start working remotely. And a lot of folks weren't prepared for that when it came down to the technology and the stuff happening in the background to make sure that devices that go home with employees were secure, that folks had, all the apps and access to all the information that they needed when they were working from home. So, I think Jamf has been helping organizations do this for, 18 years now. And we're finally at a place where folks that were using Jamf were able to pivot immediately. Just like employees at Jamf, we got a message from the CEO and Dean said, hey, folks, we're going to start to work from home. And we were able to pivot within, 24 hours. Whereas a lot of other companies, schools especially, have struggled to kind of help their end users be productive in such an ambiguous time, because we have people that are working from home that are also parents and needing to work with remote learning and also, take care of the home and take care of all the other things. And so really what Jamf helps do is in the back end, we're able to help organizations deploy tools like Zoom to be able to have offsite meetings or virtual meetings when they typically would do that in person. We also help on the security side, especially with healthcare companies who need to maintain HIPAA compliance, where we're needing to make sure we protect the data that lives on there with passcode policies and encryption policies, all from afar. And so the beautiful thing is that this all works over the air. So if you needed to make a change, you could do that right from the Jamf portal and get Zoom on a device that may not have had it before. And I know that one particular influence that we've had is in onboarding, employee onboarding. So companies that are still, hiring throughout the pandemic how are they providing a great experience to onboard their employees. And so Jamf, along with Apple Business Manager, which is a free program offered by Apple, allows those companies to buy a Mac, ship it to the employee, and Jamf takes over and pretty much just gets everything on there.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I definitely feel like Jamf has been a great asset for our company because we have, hundreds of people working for us, and there's a lot of iOS devices out there. And when everybody is instantaneously working from home, which is honestly what happened with our company, overnight, we just said to the whole employee base, you're going to be working from home. So having Jamf there actually is kind of peace of mind for us as like one security layer where every employee has Jamf on the device. We can deploy, a new app if there's a new app or anything like that. I definitely feel like it's for anybody that is working in a remote environment, which is a lot of us now. I do feel like Jamf kind of just is a security layer that's kind of a no-brainer because it's really simple to manage. I'm talking as a customer of Jamf also, so I feel like it really works well for us as a company. So I guess another question for you,
Thank you.
What would you? Yeah. Another question for you is like, what are some key benefits to implementing a device management strategy early? Like, what would you say would be a good way to do that, and why do it early?
Yeah, that is an excellent question because we typically run into scenarios where customers have already purchased their Apple devices and they're already in the hands of employees. And so, not implementing a strategy early can cause a ton of pain in the future. So like, for example, one of the biggest things or challenges that people face is around the Apple ID, which is pretty much a consumer feature. So you'll need it to download an app. So many times folks that I talk to either use the same Apple ID on all the devices, which can result in, private pictures or messages showing up on all devices. So we don't want that. Or they've created a unique Apple ID and password for every single device. And at that point now, it's hard for me to keep my password straight. I can't imagine doing that for a fleet of Apple devices to be able to do that in that way for a business. So for Jamf, we are actually able to deploy applications over the air without the need for an Apple ID, or help customers understand what they want their strategy to be. Do you want these devices to be business only, or do you want to allow some sort of personal usage? And so these are some questions that folks typically don't ask until they run into that problem. So thinking about, how you're gonna deploy apps to devices and keep them up to date, how you're gonna help with loss prevention, right? What happens if you lose a device? What's the plan to make sure that HIPAA compliance is in place and I'm able to remove that sensitive information from that device? So a lot of these questions should be asked up front, but we totally understand that folks might not know what the possibilities are. And so Jamf really helps them kind of get a handle on that so that in the future they don't need to worry about those problems.
I'm assuming the problem also gets worse over time. So say you have like a provider group of like 8 people and they're successful, and then it grows to 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. If you have 60 people, 3 devices per person, 2 devices per person, that's a lot to manage. So it can be complex getting all the devices and locking them down over time. Would you say that happens often? I'm just curious, like as you are walking into these practices.
Yeah, I think many of the customers that I talk to that are in that SMB space, they're running into that problem because it's just, I don't know. I know how to use this device as a consumer, so I know what I need to do as an individual to get the device working. But it is definitely something that comes into play often. So many practices, like you said, we want to encourage that growth, but depending on the strategy that you implement at the start, it might not be scalable. And so then you have to reset once you get to that 60, 70 mark. But we want to help you get there without needing to have that reset button.
Right. Awesome.
Now, Daniel, I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the newest features that Dr. Chrono has implemented. So I know that you, the Dr. Chrono team, pushed forward a video visits feature, which kind of speaks to some of the telehealth facts that you shared with us a little bit earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about video visits and how your customers have been impacted by using that?
Yeah, so I think I went into just like the education phase for the providers. There are differences between us and other video technologies like GoToWebinar, what we're on now. We're on GoToWebinar. A webinar tool is great, but when you're in healthcare in particular, there's a lot of other mechanics and things that you're going to want to use. So what Dr. Chrono did is we launched telehealth as a layered part of our product today. It's offered for free in conjunction with all of the other things that you kind of purchase as our products. What the difference between us and say a GoToWebinar is if you're a provider and you're having that encounter with that patient, there's a lot of interactions that may have to happen. So if the provider wants to order a lab, right? Say the provider says to the patient, oh, this is your, annual checkup. Let's have you get your cholesterol checked. They can do that while on the visit with the patient. As well, if the patient says, I'm not feeling well, the provider can also just administer through electronic prescription a prescription. So that video visit is really interactive in the sense that the provider can say, where would you like to pick up that prescription? Where would you like to get that lab, taken for your cholesterol? And all of that is happening digitally in the background while the doctor is actually talking to the patient. And what's really great about the way that we're thinking about it is the doctor also has to document the encounter so that as they're talking to the patient, there's a lot happening in the background where the provider can actually document what's happening. And once that document is created, they can submit that for reimbursement. So it's all happening in tandem as like one unified product, which is really beneficial to the provider. And what's great about the telehealth side of it is we are seeing reimbursements happening at a larger rate than ever before. And we're seeing more telehealth appointments happening at an exponential rate than we ever have before as a company. So when you're a provider and you need, I would say, that core operating system for your practice, meaning like all those just features I kind of mentioned, when you have telehealth layered into that, you really can just create a complete virtual practice if you want. So I'll give you an example, like mental health professionals. I think they're a great use case for telehealth. There's a stigma, at least in the United States, that going to a mental health professional like a psychologist or psychiatrist, it's like, you might feel ashamed about it. And there's a whole like slew of emotions, like getting in your car, driving to the psychiatrist's office, getting out of your car, kind of sitting there in the waiting room. It's kind of this full range of emotions that can possibly happen. When you can instantaneously book online and find that time that works for you as the patient and not have to go through that experience, you're getting exactly, we're bringing healthcare to like the modern age where a patient can feel like the privacy of their home. They can have that conversation in their home. People are always most comfortable, honestly, in their home. So you can really kind of engage with that mental health professional. But I think the world has literally changed. I think we're going to see the world like kind of open up way more to what telehealth can be. So it's a really interesting time, and it's not just one specialty. Like everything from like physical therapists are showing like range of motion to gastroenterologists explaining like what they're going to be doing to you before you come in, to like just mental health professionals, general practitioners, orthopedic surgeons. So I would say every specialty is really looking at this. And this is, it's rare to see this in healthcare where things just change. Like literally it just is changing as we're speaking. So it's a really unique time where I would love to see I think it's going to be like a given that you're going to expect your provider to have like telehealth sessions, at least some appointments available, like for a follow-up visit. Say the provider is seeing you, they've taken care of you. Do you really need to go back all the time, right? Right? So
Yes.
I'll give you an example. Say you have like an elderly homebound patient, meaning like it's really hard for them to get up. They have no one to take them to the doctor. And the provider just saw them last week, but they want to just do a quick follow-up, like about how they're feeling, about whatever medication or whatever was done. If they can do that through a video visit, you're enabling that, elderly patient to just like have that encounter virtually without having to go through the pain and suffering of like getting in a car, driving to the doctor's office, finding someone to get them there. So I would say the world will be a better place, honestly, with telehealth in general. I just think it's going to be, and it's horrible that it was COVID that had to push us this way, but I do feel like there's some good like thinking that's coming out of this where we're really pushing the technologies. And I'm sure this is happening with Jamf also. Like, how do you deploy Dr. Chrono to 70 providers, right? How do you do that?
Hopefully easily and over the air.
Yeah, and I think Jamf just like is another cloud tool that just makes their lives easier. So like not only do they get this telehealth solution on, iPad, iPhone, web, but you can deploy it easily with Jamf. So you get these two cloud products together and it creates this really powerful product that any modern practice that's kind of like, they're not in one physical location. They can really manage that like the virtual practice at scale. Could we do that, pre-COVID? Yeah, but would doctors, do it? I would say that they'd say, why not have the patients just come into the office, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you brought up so many good points. Like I really love the analogy that you made with mental health, because you're right. I mean, it takes a lot for you to say, all right, I'm going to get in my car, I'm going to get all the way there, and then to actually get out of the car. So, I mean, I love how a lot of what you mentioned, Daniel, has the patient in mind. Really, the goal, it seems like, is one, security, obviously, to make sure everyone is still safe, but to provide an experience that people are comfortable with. Just because like I was speaking to my husband and he hates the dentist, and he hates the dentist because he saw a movie when he was younger that portrayed dentists as, this very painful experience. And so just being able to kind of change the narrative and help folks become more comfortable in spaces that they typically won't be comfortable in. Because, when it comes to health, sometimes you have to have those hard conversations. So if you can do it from the comfort of your home or in a way that it makes the patient more comfortable, then that's a win for me, especially if I'm the patient and I'm thinking about it from that perspective. That's a huge win. And one other thing I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into is you mentioned a ton of different things that you can do within Dr. Chrono. And it sounds like, there's a ton of different integrations that kind of make Dr. Chrono that complete solution that connects and links to all of the other systems that a practice might need to use. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how, those integrations and those partnerships really help streamline certain processes for practices that are leveraging Dr. Chrono.
Yeah, and I think we really have, I call it an open API philosophy, where we can bring in third parties, and we're a partner of Jamf's, right? So like for us, we're kind of looking at it as like a concierge type of experience where a provider can get the best experience possible without the data having to be double entried. There's a lot of, I'd say, software out there that doesn't have, it doesn't exchange data easily. So if you take, say you take two apps and one app doesn't have an API, and you take another app and it does have an API, you know, I'll give you an example like box.com, right? Or Acronis. They have APIs, which means that you can build an app, you can have one app communicate to another app. And with Dr. Chrono, we have an open API philosophy, which means you can layer in, like, you know how we have these they call it chiclets on an iPad or an iPhone. So you can layer in your chiclet home screen, and you can select apps that kind of cross communicate. And we're doing that today with a lot of our partners in Dr. Chrono. I'll give you 2 examples of partners of Dr. Chrono that we are cross communicating some data. One is Physitrack. It's an iOS focused product. Physitrack, when a patient is seen in Dr. Chrono on an iPad, and this can be done virtually through the virtual visit now. Say the patient is seen and they say they have like a knee problem, their knee is hurting them. They went to their provider. The provider said that, yes, there's a problem with your knee. You should get some physical therapy. We can cross communicate with the Physitrack app now, where that app actually can take information from Dr. Chrono to administer like pre-recorded videos, and Physitrack has a pre-recorded video catalog. So you have not only your like core tool, Dr. Chrono, to see your patient, but you could auto administer videos for physical therapy to a patient. That's hugely powerful because the provider, if they're using a tool that's siloed and doesn't communicate with other products, it becomes, you know, it's not as good of an experience. So I think for us, healthcare should allow the patient and the provider to take data and have that like smart communication. Now we have, you know, hundreds and hundreds of developers building on Dr. Chrono. And I think it all depends on like what the provider is doing. We have genomics companies building on Dr. Chrono. We have wearable companies building on Dr. Chrono. We have Internet of Things building on Dr. Chrono. So like a blood pressure cuff. That's another example. You could put a blood pressure cuff on, that data goes into your iPhone. It would be great if you could send that to your provider, right? I think the world will change, like fast forward 10 years. There's another, I'd call it layer to telehealth that I think is going to be really powerful. So not only is there telehealth, but there's going to be something called RPM. RPM is remote patient monitoring. So say the provider said, you know, say the patient has diabetes, right? Or they're pre-diabetic. The provider can do remote patient monitoring. And what that means is they can just do check-in and just look at the data and say, here's the data set. Let me do a telehealth visit with this patient. Let me tell them how they're doing with their pre-diabetes. Having these devices and having it all cross interchange, this like medical data, will allow the provider to do more remotely and allow the patient to take more control in terms of like tracking what they're doing. Now this can happen through 2 apps, right? So you can take like workout apps, you can take like, you know, even, you know, there's temperature apps, right? You can log your information on like, do I have COVID? You know, you can log, you know, it's I'm above 100, I'm getting worried, I think I may have it, you know, let me schedule that telehealth appointment. But, and the provider can say, okay, I've been tracking you over time, it just looks like you still have, you know, whatever that is. And, you know, they can kind of figure out like what's happening there together. But I think that there's our future is, I would say, very bright in the sense that like the healthcare experience is only going to get better over time. Now, even like Apple had, you know, announced the blood oxygen tracking yesterday. And they announced that on Apple Watch yesterday. So what does that mean for healthcare, right? Like, and this is kind of just, you know, the beginning of all of these devices. Like I'm wearing an Apple Watch right now. Fast forward 5 years, 10 years, you're going to be able to do so much more from your home and from wherever you are as a patient. And the provider will be able to pull that information up in like a dashboard it's going to be an even more interesting conversation about what's happening. The government talks about something called precision medicine. It means having more precise medicine. And what that means for all of us is we spend a lot on healthcare. So there's a massive spend in the United States on healthcare. The government's, they believe if you can make medicine more precise for the individual, the spend of the GDP will go down. And I don't think that that's wrong. So like if they administer the right drug at the right time for the right patient, or if you do the right physical therapy at the right time for the patient, or if you have whatever that patient needs at that time, you're not going to have this enormous spend over time. So all of these wearables and the open API, I think it's going to be a really interesting, things are just going to be really, honestly, we're going to have a brighter future than we had in the past in healthcare. And I do think things are changing where patients are expecting, right? You're expecting like a modern experience. You're expecting to be able to see your doctor through like a telehealth visit. And the doctors are expecting it also now. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah, certainly. One thing I did want to celebrate too is the Apple Watch and that the announcements that came yesterday. It was very exciting. I mean, even my dad was in the hospital for about a week, last month, and they couldn't quite understand what was happening. And had he been wearing an Apple Watch, maybe it could have fed into the EHR system to show what his blood pressure was and his heart rate and things like that, so they could actually see a history over time. So that's where I see a lot of that coming into play, where me as an individual, I might not be able to articulate how I feel in a medical sense, but something like hard data from an Apple Watch will help the doctor piece that together. So that was a huge win. We definitely celebrated that here at Jamf. And I know Adam Mahmood on our team, he's super excited about what's to come for sure.
Awesome. So I guess
oops, yeah. So sorry. I just wanted to pop in and mention, a lot of the integrations and the data and all of that you mentioned. It sounds like there's a big focus on more productivity and saving time, right? Being able to connect all of that data and leverage technology to help us parse that data out so that we can more quickly get to a decision. So I'm so glad to hear that there are a lot of different options for Dr. Chrono customers to be able to do that.
Awesome, thank you. I guess a question for you is, because of COVID, what have you seen happen with Jamf and like people's workflows? Apple technology is honestly the best in the world. Like, what have you seen in the way that people have been working with Jamf and with Apple because of COVID?
Yeah, there are a couple of different focuses, right? Typically, in an office, you can control the environment to a degree. Now there are a lot of unknown factors, especially if I'm taking a corporate-owned device home. So a lot of the conversation has been one around security. That's obviously top of mind, especially now with everything going on. I feel like there's a lot more phishing going on out there. So be careful with any links that you click. But the other thing too is around enabling your team, right? We can give them the tools, but how do we make sure that they're successful and that they can collaborate? That's where the conversation around Zoom came, and Slack, and some of these tools that kind of keep us in the office while we're not in the office. So that's one on the kind of commercial business side. The other big conversation has been around remote learning and education. So, us along with Apple and a couple of other partners have been putting together resources to help schools better leverage the technology that they have, so that they can help kids that are at home and with parents that are also working to be able to make sure that that technology just works for them. So making it simple enough for a kid, no matter the age, to be able to pop into an iPad and get to learning. So yeah, it's been mostly focused around security and enablement, and then of course the remote learning aspect of it as well. I guess I would pose the same question to you, Daniel. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on what you think the long-term effects of COVID will be on healthcare. I think we've talked about it at length, and it sounds like, you know, transformation is really at the top of it. But what do you think, you know, if and when we come out of this, what will be the lasting effect on healthcare?
The brick and mortar's location was critical in the past. And, you know, how do you find a provider, right? A lot of the time it's like just who's around you. You might go on Yelp and say who has the best reviews. You might go on another site and say, you know, who's just closest to my home. Are people going to do that in the future? Maybe. But there's definitely going to be a shift in some type of providers and the way that patients are finding those providers. So I wouldn't be surprised if patients start to see providers that are 50 miles away. That's far, right? Like if you have to go to your doctor and drive 50 miles, they have to be really good, right? And you might do it because they're really good, but that's a far drive. And, you know, maybe it's 100 miles, 200 miles, you know, how far that provider has really affected the way that healthcare was administered in the past. Because of COVID, I think patients are also finding providers that just fit their needs, as opposed to just geolocated, this is convenient, they're down the block. We're going to see a shift where a lot of these providers are going to almost have to have digital marketing, as opposed, when you have that brick and mortar store, patients are just driving by it and they're like, okay, that's where I'm going to go see my general practitioner, my family practitioner, my, you know, internist, or, oh, I didn't realize that, you know, dermatologist is over there. A lot of it was super hyper local. I think with COVID, things may change for certain specialties where the providers will be encountering patients that they've never encountered before that may not have a car. Say a patient doesn't have a car, they may not have the means to get to that provider. It's going to be a different world for some specialties. And I think that that's a good thing, because you want to see the provider who's best for you. And the provider wants to take care of the patient that, like, honestly, that fits their profile best. In the past, a lot of it was like the convenience of that provider. I mean, what else is going to change? You know, there's going to be some interesting things. I spoke to one clinic. They're a pop-up clinic. They literally just pop up and then they do instant COVID testing. So I am seeing a rethinking also around like what healthcare means. I've never spoken to any providers like that had a pop-up clinic prior to COVID. A pop-up clinic, cars can drive in, they do the instant test, they do it at like scale. You know, that conversation that I had about that group that's setting up clinics around, they're looking at like, how do we do this across the country? How do we do mass testing across the country at scale when these things happen? COVID is just one of many things that's going to happen. How do we just like set up a process for that? So like this pop-up clinic, I was like, it's almost like a pop-up. They had these like pop-up shops, right? You pop-up shop in New York City, pop-up shop in California.
Mm-hmm.
You go in and you're like, oh, there's this, they're literally, you know, I think that there may be a new type of provider out there that's going to like set up a shop, instant pop-up clinic, and they're going to do services like right there for like an emergency outbreak. It was super fascinating to me about, you know, talking to that group, because I've never heard of that before. And it's not like, you know, I don't think that conversation would have happened without COVID. I've had conversations with patients that have had COVID. I've had conversations with providers who have had COVID. Some providers can weather the storm of not working, right? They can say, I'm going to take 2 months off. They have it, you know, the means to take care of themselves for 2 months. Others have like a small practice and they don't have the means to not take time off. So telehealth also allows the provider to protect themselves and their family but also make a living if they are that like
Yeah.
one doctor practice group. I do think that the larger organizations can kind of, it all depends on the provider, depends on their situation, but some can weather out the storm of not working if they get sick. Others still need to get paid and they're still fine. They just may have COVID and they may want to see that patient. So you can do that in that remote way. But sorry, going back to your question was, this kind of went on a rant.
Long-term effects of COVID, but I think, I mean, you share a lot, right? It's pushing us as, you know, a community to figure out how we can make care more accessible, really is what I'm hearing is, hey, how do we make sure that we take care of everyone, especially if, you know, God forbid another pandemic were to come and hit our spot. So I think innovation is the number one thing. Just like you mentioned, we're all just trying to get by and figure out how to transform our businesses to fit the need that we see today. So I think this has been an excellent conversation, Daniel. I do appreciate your time. I'm going to take just a minute to open it up to our attendees to see if there are any specific questions for Daniel or for myself, as we have a couple of minutes left here for the webinar. So I'll take a minute to do that and see if anything comes through. I did see one question in here asks if a telehealth only practice needs to manage their Apple devices across the country, what would be the best steps for device management? That's a great question. It sounds like that one's a little bit geared towards Jamf, so I'll go ahead and take it. But the first thing to do is one, establish a relationship with a vendor who you're going to buy your Apple devices from, just so you can establish that relationship and get a cadence going with those folks. The next thing, most importantly, would be to sign up for Apple Business Manager. You can do that at business.apple.com. It's entirely free. And that's what helps enable a lot of the over-the-air and out-of-the-box experience. So that would be step 2. And then step 3 is, of course, to sign up for your Jamf Now account and get your devices added. There are 2 ways to do it. The first is automatically through Apple Business Manager, so that will take care of it. But if you have devices that are not Business Manager capable, you can always add devices to Jamf Now using a URL link. But yeah, I think those 3 steps will get you started to a good device management strategy. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions. So I really want to thank you, Daniel. I do want to thank all of our healthcare providers as well. I know it's been a difficult time, so just know that I appreciate it, Jamf appreciates it, and I'm sure the rest of us appreciate your time. It looks like we have a last-minute question come through, Daniel, so I want to make sure. Ooh, the question is, what is the resolution of the video like for video visits with Dr. Chrono? She says that she is an eye doctor and video clarity is very important.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it depends on the internet speed. So we're really trying to build robust technology that can work regardless of the device you're on. So if someone is on a low bandwidth connection, it may degrade the video quality. Now, if they're on a high video connection, the video quality will be better. For us, I would say it's paramount that the experience just happens and there's no interruption. Because a lot of our medical professionals are kind of on rigid schedules, we're trying to enable the video connection as fast as possible and allowing that audio. So there's different parts to this where the audio will always go through, but if there's a low bandwidth, it may not be as high quality, but the audio and you can hear the person will still interact. I would say recommending to the patient that they are on a, local Wi-Fi at their home is probably best to get that best experience. I wouldn't, if they're traveling, I would tell them to move the appointment to a time when they're near a good internet connection. So the answer is test it out. I would definitely try it and try it with a few patients. It is free through Dr. Chrono, so that's a great benefit to you. I would definitely test it out and just recommend to patients to just be on Wi-Fi or hardwired, either one of those, and see if it works well for you.
Awesome. Thank you. I can definitely speak to that as an avid Zoom user. We have had many choppy conversations based on the internet connection, so I feel you. Perfect. Well, we're at the end of our webinar. Daniel, thank you so much for your time today. We really value our relationship with Dr. Chrono, and we look forward to continuing to working with you.
Awesome. Likewise, us as well. Thank you so much for having us.